So just yesterday, we talked about the different possibilities of Zelda games we could see make it to Nintendo Switch in 2024, and one of those stories was stemming from a leak or rumor from somebody who has accurately leaked new unannounced Nintendo Switch games in the past, with some hard to guess details such as Metroid Prime Remaster being a shadow drop when nobody was expecting that to happen, and the idea floating around was maybe we're going to be getting a game with Princess Zelda as the main protagonist. So we're playing as Zelda, not Link, in this upcoming game. Well, we're clearly going to have to wait for some kind of official announcement to see if that tease is indeed real and if it's coming soon at something like a upcoming June Nintendo Direct. But one more interesting story happened just after I posted that video, which has to do with an enhanced version of Breath of the Wild. And I would argue that if this is indeed in development, and this is coming from Midori, a tier 1 leaker up there with Pioro level of leaks, I would argue that this also could indicate that Nintendo would do the same treatment for Tears of the Kingdom. And you might remember some previous reports from Gamescom 2023 that a lot of developers were apparently talking behind the scenes saying that Nintendo was showing off Switch 2 targeted PC spec hardware, and they were showcasing things like the Matrix Awakening demo and specifically an enhanced version of Breath of the Wild that was claimed to run at 4K and have virtually no load times. Now the thought was that's probably just a tech demo, but Nintendo could pull something of a Wii U strategy at the beginning of the release of this next gen hardware and port some of their most iconic games that sold the best on the Nintendo Switch and give them an in-depth upgrade treatment where we see things like 4K resolution, potentially HDR, load times eliminated, and a host of different quality of life improvements. And could this somehow stem into the conversation of having an extra story mode where we're seeing things from Zelda's perspective at one point and actually playing as her, or having a spin-off version of the game attached to it, kind of Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury style? So there's a lot of exciting possibilities to unpack here. We're going to do all of that. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And we have to first kick it off with the tweet in question, which we do have to deep dive a little bit and explain why it's as relevant as it is. But you can first see this posted up from Midori over on X, which reads, "There is a project at Nintendo with the code name U-King-O. It might be related to the rumors of the next Nintendo console codename." A user by the name of Skipper then replies and says, "This is an enhanced version of Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's codename is U-King. For Switch 1 ports, Nintendo likes to add the suffix -S to the game's codename, but this one has a -O suffix, which they have never used before. I think it's for the successor." Midori then replies, and -C is for 3DS because 3DS is CTR. Skipper then points out, yep, the Captain Toad port is the perfect example of this. It was Kinopio on the Wii U, Kinopio-S on the Switch, and Kinopio-C on the 3DS. Now to then give you a little bit of context on the codename being potentially Ounce, you can see this post over from Centro Leaks, which reads, "This was wrong. Muji is a placeholder in the SDK files. The real codename for the new console seems to be Ounce. It was leaked accidentally by Nintendo in a Switch firmware update last year. Some are speculating whether Ounce is a way to obfuscate Ounce, or we don't know yet. And it might be OZ, it might be like the spelling Ounce, but you can see clearly within some firmware code from data miners that have been noted that trustedcerts.ounce.bdf is a portion of that code. And we even have the most legendary Nintendo leaker of all time, Pioro, chiming in on this, replying to Midori's thread saying, "I knew that code name, but never thought it could be related to Ounce or something, to be honest." Midori has made a great point here. So if you want to keep your expectations to the absolute lowest level, there is the slightest possibility that maybe there is an internal code name with the U-King.O name floating around within Nintendo's files, and maybe Midori noticed that and is leaking that information, but maybe that is just tied to the tech demo that they showed off for those developers in person at Gamescom 2023, and maybe Nintendo doesn't actually bring this project to light. That is definitely one way to look at it. However, with a track record as significant as Midori has for leaks and things like that, you do have to pay some serious attention to this potentially being a real product that will ultimately see the light of day in retail packaging. And at that point, we are talking about a souped up 4K version of Breath of the Wild with essentially no load times, potentially some additional side content. Maybe that's where the Zelda rumor plays into with as a playable character. Maybe that's a totally separate project, but this kind of opens up the floodgates of what we might see Nintendo do with select Switch titles where they give them that deluxe treatment. I'm entirely imagining that all of the DLC will clearly be packed into the game so you can own it on one cartridge or download it all as one file and you don't have to go purchase it separately. But I also think Nintendo will likely sell this at a full $60 or even $70 price point, potentially charging more than the original release because they're going to see this as added value. Breath of the Wild is over 30 million copies strong on Nintendo Switch, and there's a large chunk of that audience, probably 10 million plus, that would double dip and replay the game in 4K with all of the modern enhancements and faster load times that we see Nintendo implement. The thing that gets dicey and what might have some people concerned is, does this mean that Nintendo is going to not support something like backwards compatibility on their next console? And if you believe any of the leaks and rumors we've been talking about on this channel recently, it seems like backwards compatibility is all but confirmed for this next gen system, and we've even had some direct references to it being a feature from Ubisoft CEO. Even if you don't want to look into leaks and rumors and things, he's just talking about updating Sparks of Hope to get it to run better on the next console and reselling it on the next console. I think it's going to be a feature here. If you look at Nintendo's history, when they are keeping something that is similar in form factor to the last console, they never forego backwards compatibility as a feature. Now, when it's a straight up media shift, like we're going from cartridge to disc or disc back to a smaller type of cartridge, like what we did with the Wii U to the Switch, at that point, there is a hard reset and a disconnect sometimes, and you don't have any kind of backwards compatibility. But then the question becomes, is these features going to be locked to a brand new developed version of Breath of the Wild that can only be purchased at that $60 or $70 retail? Or do we see Nintendo give some kind of upgrade path to existing Breath of the Wild owners? And that's the more interesting conversation to me, because I do think backwards compatibility will be intact, but I don't know if Nintendo will offer that $10 upgrade path, kind of like what Sony does, where if you already own the game, you can get the modern enhancements, but you have to pay something like $10 on the eShop. I'm very hopeful they do that, and that they don't make us rebuy a game twice whenever it's very similar and not even that long of a distance from its original release to rebuy it. But there's no guarantees with Nintendo. And then the part two of my theory with this is, if we're going to get a version of Breath of the Wild at 4K, no load times and all of these enhancements, what would stop Nintendo from also doing that for Tears of the Kingdom? And would they space them out quite a ways where they're 4 or 5 years apart? Potentially, but I could also see Tears of the Kingdom being one of those games a year or two after the Switch's launch, and maybe Breath of the Wild is right there at launch for Switch 2, and it gets legitimately that exact same treatment. Granted, no DLC included for Tears of the Kingdom, but we get the no load times, the 4K, and all the better frame rate and everything like that included. I think that that is a realistic possibility that Nintendo does with this next gen console, and it's very interesting that we have these code names floating around following the reports that there was indeed a behind closed doors session of Nintendo showing off a 4K version of Breath of the Wild with no load times. It seems like it's one of these projects that might move forward outside of any potential ports or remasters we still want to happen, or even a standalone Zelda game where she's the playable character. And I'm still, it's out for debate on whether or not these two different rumors are correlating to each other. Like, would there be like a separate gameplay mode you could enter where things are unfolding from Zelda's perspective within Breath of the Wild, or you're living through the memories as Princess Zelda and you're seeing like a more in-depth version of that storytelling? Like, there's some different things Nintendo could do with this to kind of merge those two ideas together, but they could also very easily be entirely separate projects, and that's kind of where I'm leaning towards more than them being somehow linked together. But let me know in the comments down below what you make of all of this. Do you think we're going to get 4K Breath of the Wild with no load times for Nintendo Switch 2? And are you excited, and would you double dip on this game to pick it up and actually have it in your Switch 2 collection? Or are you somebody who will probably only partake in this if Nintendo does indeed offer some kind of upgrade path via backwards compatibility for the original game, if you're somebody who's already bought the game and the DLC? And do you think Nintendo will offer that type of upgrade path similar to Sony has done with their PS4 to PS5 type of upgrades? Or do you think it's going to be one of those things where we're just forced to shell out another $60 or $70 to repurchase a game that technically still works on our Switch 2 via backwards compatibility? Or do you think this signals that backwards compatibility isn't there? Really interested to hear all of the different ideas around this. So thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. Make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave the video. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.